Welcome back, another month, another release of Armory 3D. Now this one is a big deal. We have 16 new pull requests, but more importantly, there are many different things in this release that you would have expected to be already in Armory 3D, but aren't, or are much better off now. For example, the raycast, the navigation system that you use to make your enemy AIs and all that stuff, it wasn't very usable, it wasn't very powerful, but now it's really good. For example, we have a bunch of new features. For example, dynamic generation of navmesh. Previously you had to generate it before starting the game, so everything was pre-generated and then you press start, which wasn't very efficient if you wanted to modify things in runtime, if you wanted to block the navmesh objects from going to a certain direction even though it was available previously. All that stuff is completely fixed because you can generate nav meshes at runtime, which is really powerful. We also have a crowd system. Before, these objects that use the same nav mesh, they weren't aware of each other's existence, so they would often pick the same route and sort of like collide and sort of try and merge into each other to optimize themselves on this route. Well, that's no longer a case because now these different objects will be aware of each other using that same nav mesh. Now making AIs in your game is going to be really cool, really powerful. We also have a bunch of new nodes. For example, the on-remove node, which allows you to trigger events when something is removed, which is something that we probably should have had previously because it's very useful. For example, if you're removing a bullet, then play this logic node after a certain timer or something like that. There's a lot of things that you can do with this new node. We have a lot of new updates to the tile sheet, the tile sheet improvement. Now I've talked about the tile sheet before. It essentially allows you to play image sequences onto planes or cubes or whatever or what kind of primitive object you want, but it is really cool for making unique styled games. The fact that you can now more easily use tile sheets inside of Armory 3D is opening the doorway for a lot more 2.5D game styles to be made, which is a really cool style of game. We also have another node, the set global canvas visible. Now when you go into Armory 3D, you can create all sorts of different canvases, and in those canvases you can create all sorts of different elements. Now for example, if you want to make a player health system and whatnot, you can do that, that's great. But if you want to hide that when you go to a different scene, for example, you have to hide all the different properties individually, or at least that's what you had to do, or use a loop or node or something of that nature. The point is, this node simply removes that entire canvas, which is something that we probably should have needed a while ago, but it's here now, so who's to complain? So yeah. Very awesome stuff. We also have some cleanup in the canvas section of the nodes. We now have them classed into their different categories, whereas before it was all sort of a big mess. We have the addition of 3 new regular expression logic nodes that allow you to do a bunch of different stuff like replacing all sorts of different parameters, strings, stuff of that nature, so you can swap things out and do a bunch of really cool stuff that we'll probably get into in future videos. And of course we have the wait for input node, which is similar to the merge node in its usage. You can, for example, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It waits for the different inputs, and instead of needing to repeat this action for 4 different times, you just create these 4 different properties and that single node and that single result. So it saves on making a bunch of unnecessary logic nodes, so it allows you to clean up your workspace. We also have the final addition of the 2 new world to screen, or well, it's not new nodes, but they've been updated. You can now see that the world to screen now has the ability to select different cameras. So if you're using different cameras switching in the same scene, you can now select which camera you want to do the calculations from, which is really cool for a lot of different situations. Now there are still 5 bounties available. If you are a coder and you want to earn a bit of money and help the Armory 3D community, then that is a possibility. There is the ability to use parallax collision mapping, dynamic diffuse global illumination, all this really awesome stuff that Armory 3D doesn't actually support yet. And that's it. We have a bunch of really interesting bug fixes like every single release, but we have in this version a lot of big improvements and new features that are really going to boost Armory 3D and help you make some incredible projects. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next month probably.